Did you have a good time in Trondheim? Well, it's becoming a bit of a tropical city, I would say. So you can see how the residents are all out there, glorifying their long summer vacation because you come back in 6 months, the sun never comes up, and they are very industrious because of that, let's say, and or else they sleep all winter, like we all should for some of us in the north. But today I'm going to talk about our next ports, Ålesund and Kristiansand. By the way, the A with a zero over that's pronounced O, in case you wonder the spelling. But Norwegian has its own special letters and special sounds, let's say, and so it's not so distant from German and English, except that, of course, you can feel that you've been through Norway. There were once all these isolated communities that were very hard to get over land, rough at sea, and so the Norwegian character was very much built upon isolation and contemplation and that other thing called desperation. And so this is where modern life and all the technology has made a complete change of particularly the fortunes and the health of people here. But the character of sort of endurance and perseverance and sort of self-discipline goes on with the Norwegians. But we're going at this time of year, it's also pleasant. You'd think that nothing would ever bother the world because it's all warm and sunny for the time being. But anyway, we're up higher in Trondheim, but Molde was where we were yesterday, and we're coming just back down to Ålesund right here. And you see it's on all of the fjords and many little towns. And of course you saw just right here off the ship, the main train station comes from Oslo up to Trondheim, about halfway up Norway. But just to build a train, much less a road down to these places, is quite a challenge. And then we're going to go down further south to Kristiansand. But we're going to Ålesund, which is, again, a little city that's sort of perched on the edge of a fjord on the bit of the flat land that there is. But for hundreds of years, this was a trading center back when timber was sent out and fish were caught and sent out. And so this became a prosperous, smaller town. And it's just noted for its beautiful scenery, like so many other places we've been already. And there are many other little towns around it, and ferries and bridges and tunnels and things like this now. But it's famous for having an Art Nouveau architecture. But above all, it's easy to get around. So we're going to dock nearby. We can walk out and then walk around this town. There are a few canals and docks and bridges and such, so it makes it particularly easy to walk around here. And you can see some of the turrets and the Norwegian-style Art Nouveau architecture in this town. It is also, if you want to go for a kayak and a boat ride and things like that, again, the ship offers all kinds of excursions out into the fjordlands or just around the small town itself, but it's just very scenic, sort of like a bit of Venice up here in the far north. And of course, lots of flowers. I have never seen so many flowers in bloom, or am I just finally paying attention? Molde had whole rows, as if the roses were taking over for the month or so. But this town is similar, but has not so big as Trondheim. Trondheim stretches out. Pamela and I walked for 2 miles up to the university and back, and we learned that we should have taken the bus. By the way, it was completely closed down. There wasn't even a caretaker. I should have known, but that's right. I'll be back someday. But Ålesund had a big fire, 1904, burnt down the old wooden buildings. And so it rebuilt with Norwegian crown funds and banks and such. But famously, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany, who had come up here on his yacht for a vacation, donated money to build more new buildings. And that doesn't look new to us, but a lot of them at the time were a radical style, what they called Art Nouveau in French or Jugendstil in German. So this is actually the museum of the style, the Jungen style, the youth and the new style of the beginning of the 20th century. And so you can just walk around and see the specialize in sort of turrets and special windows, a lot of detail. And it now seems a bit out of date. We have our own style, which is mostly plain glass boxes. So, you know, if you're a fan of architectural history, it's been a very dramatic change in the world, because, as one historian said, back when labor was cheap but materials were expensive, they could buy the stone and they would have people working, carving it forever. Now the labor's expensive, but the material is relatively cheaper, so you can knock up a big glass building with a lot of room, but there's no attention to detail. There's no handiwork anymore. So this may be the last time when people spent a great deal of time and effort just to decorate buildings. And it was also literature and music and fashion and interior design. All of that were finally called Art Nouveau or Jugendstil. So that museum has period rooms and even cutlery and drapery and all this stuff that was of the style in the early 1900s. And back then, because of steamships, suddenly people came up here to visit, which was unheard of before, just because it was so far and so cold and so difficult to get up here. But then Ålesund became a well-known visited port, and people appreciated the farther and farther north. As I say, we're only about halfway up to Nordkapp, the northern point of Norway in Europe. But again, Norway has sort of transformed itself from isolated farming and fishing communities to become a major tourist destination, which keeps the economy going, and the reception here, which we enjoy. But here, just in Ålesund, there are still the remnants of the big fish packing houses. So it used to be you catch something fresh, you'd come in, they put it on salt. Later they had ice, but mostly they had the cannery, which, like in Alaska, was a great invention that meant that they could keep fish at least in a tin so it could be enjoyed around the world. So that led to a very big boom in what was the herring trade. And the Norwegians would come out and catch great shiploads of herring, and like sardines in a can. That would be the way they were sent out. Now they're all either frozen, but above all, there are not many left. The whole herring industry got overfished, and so now there's some bit of it, but the ships have to go way up into the Arctic now to find what is left of the fish stocks that used to be right out of the harbor here. And Ålesund still has buildings and some dock facilities that come from that fishing trade. This is one of their stations where they would measure how much fish had been taken to tax it or to sell it off the dock. So the fishermen became the lifeblood of this particular town, like Trondheim and others. And there's this monument to the lost fishermen. And then when I was last there, I found this statue of the wife and the mother wanting to see her son or husband come back in from the dangers of the sea. But then again, she may be just waiting for the bus. And then here's the tomb of, the sacrificial human attracting the birds so they won't land on our head. The most famous of the sons of Ålesund, though, was Rollo. And most people don't remember him because that was about 825 when he and his band of fishermen went all the way to France, went up the Seine and laid siege to Paris. And then they were finally bought off by King Charles of France at the time, who gave the Rollo and his Norsemen Normandy, and that's why it's called Normandy. It was given to the Normans so they would not be so, let's say, troublesome. And then his ancestor, William, became the conqueror of Britain. So the Ålesund is particularly proud of Rollo for having caused so much trouble. And that was just the nature of the Vikings. As I said earlier, the Viking word actually means to go from bay to bay. It's a verb, vi går vikinga. We're going around to spread love and joy to other peoples. And so this is a fabled era where these kind of ferocious and berserker, they call them, warriors kept pillaging and going all the way around Europe and beyond. But coming back to Ålesund, the heritage of it is now there's no more conquest. Now there's hardly any fish. So what's a young Viking to do? Well, you get dressed up and play Viking. This is, and so in all these ports that we go to in parts of Norway and Sweden, there's always somebody who's sort of playing the lore like a pirate adventure, and you can take a ride on it. And they try to be mean and nasty looking, which I guess they are, except that they're actually new age, sensitive, caring men who might even be vegan, but this, I found this, they host a Viking cruise on a longboat. You get to row and get your appetite up, and then they invite you to dinner. Now, they didn't do this in the old days. It was not quite so polite, but that's sort of the cultural heritage of Ålesund and Norway in general, and so you just have to give in and let them entertain you. And if you walk in the town with the older houses and the narrow lanes, and you can also either take a bus up or go up to this observation point. That's where the pictures are taken. But if you're in the need to get a little more appetite for our feasting aboard, you can always go this way, and then go at night and see the beautiful view over the islands and Ålesund. But many people come here, have a day in the town, and then they go off into the fjordland. Now, we've already seen that every place we land, there's this vast interior in many places, and maybe some are more scenic than others, but there's sort of nothing quite like the mountains meeting the sea. And so there are a lot of other towns and other places to go out of these ports where we are. And it just gets more and more rugged as you go up into the fjord and up into the mountains. And you can stay in places. There are so many little towns. You'd think that people wouldn't live in these places because what are they going to do? Well, they have little farms and they used to have little fish. And so Norway used to be the poorest country per capita in Europe. And now, because of the oil industry and other technical innovations and things, you have the old fish shacks right next to the condos and the shopping mall. So this is just the fate of the world, and lucky for Norway, I'd say. But this is going up the Geiranger Fjord. It's just, again, a spectacular place. Maybe a little too sunny for us these days, because I remember someone told me, "Oh, we're sorry it's so sunny because you can just sort of see everything. But when the clouds come down, it's very mysterious." And so you can go up on boats and see the waterfalls and the scenic extent of it all. It just is more and more and more. Particularly of the Geiranger Fjord, that's one of the more popular places. There's a big ice field up in the mountains that then in the summer spray off with all these waterfalls. So here's just a couple of them. And there are a lot of excursion boats that go out of Ålesund just to go up there and see them. So this is the Seven Sisters, they call it, this incredible waterfall that comes down. And you can on a good day get up pretty close to it. And if you're on the right small vessel, you get a free shower. But this is the spectacular nature of this part of Norway. And if you dare, you can also, somewhere right up there, someone put up a big swing just for the photo op of it. And I think that it says, no need for a life jacket, but you better hang on. So this is, there's not much to say about the beauty other than you'll see the real thing here. Especially if the sun ever goes down, it's sort of, the mountains start to glow. Well, we'll see Ålesund tomorrow. Then go down to the south coast to Kristiansand. There's a lot of other towns called Kristiansund and variations, but this is about on the southern tip of Norway, down right there, Kristiansand. But you can see there are a lot of other fjords and lakes and rivers. So, I mean, we are up in the fjordland. This is more farmland. Oslo is over on the right side of the map here. And most people don't go to Kristiansand if they're coming to see the fjords. They don't have time. But this is a typical town on the shore in the south, which is considered sort of the balmy coast of southern Norway. And it's a pretty big town. It has a university and some industries and things like that. But it's most famous for having been set up by the Danish crown as a fortress to protect Norway from whoever else wanted it. And it's developed as a port. The king, Christian himself, came and founded it and built the fort, which remains. The last time it had any action is when it repelled a Royal Navy invasion in the Napoleonic era, 1804, and they successfully defended the town from being taken over and whatever the consequences would have been. But anyway, it's still there. But of course, Norway became independent from Denmark, so now they feel like they have to defend themselves from Danish tourists who don't want to buy a T-shirt or something. It's, you know, this is such a peaceful part of the world now that war is a whole other thing. But I'll go on to that when I talk about Oslo. But the town was laid out on a sandy spit of ground that was level enough to put up a kind of a grid town, and it's still there, same kind of place. And it doesn't get many tourists other than other Norwegians who come from the north or the central Norway to come down for a holiday, because it's closer than Mallorca, I suppose, because it has a sunnier climate, it has beaches and facilities and hotels. It's also known as a place for immigration, so part of the modern Norwegian experience, just like everywhere else in the world, we have people from all over the world coming either legally or illegally to come and live. So you'll see this also in Oslo and even in Trondheim, how there's a lot of new housing. Most Norwegians don't really want to live in an apartment. They're either in a house or in the countryside or on a boat. But it's still a town of about 400,000 people in the larger area, so it's a pretty big town. It has the central square with a cathedral like we just saw. And though I have to say, I went to the cathedral today. We walked up there, and I've never gone to a church that was closed on Sunday. Must be some special thing going on there if they won't let you in, right? But anyway, this is the Radhus, the town square, like you saw, the big one up today, Trondheim. A lot of classic period buildings, but this town is also famous in Norway for hosting the big Cork Music Festival, which is sort of like a big Glastonbury or whatever festival you think of. And so people come to go to the music events, and particularly jazz, rock and roll, and all those sort of things. In addition to going to that beach, there's a real beach there. And so this is the curiosity of the Kristiansand, is that people will go here when they would maybe think they're going to go to Bermuda, but this is easier to get to, and it has a lot of entertainment and events going on. So Kristiansand considers itself a cultural capital, and they sponsor things you don't see in other cities. They built this tremendous concert hall, particularly, and it gets full of people in the summer. Sometimes it's so crowded you can only get there by a kayak. Or if you're really into exotic culture, they have this Captain Schmillingly amusement park, which is built like a fortress and then faces out on the water, where they have this ship. Now that's a real pirate ship, and I've worked on a few, but that's the real thing. Or you can take a rib boat and go speeding around the harbor and seeing the outer islands. They have a lot of seals and whales out in this part of the south coast of Norway. And so this is one of the pleasures if you're there, like wherever we are. They seem to have kayaks available wherever you go nowadays, which is a great way to sort of get down and personal with the water. I found this curious. It looks like a lighthouse, but it's actually a memorial to all the sailors who have sailed out of Kristiansand. And if you go around the rocks, you can pick your own lunch. And curiously, there's coral reefs off of this part of Norway. So it's sort of about as tropical as you can get this far north. And have the pleasures of being in the water. And there are these little fjords and creeks and rivers that run far up into the countryside. And this is a matter of concern because these creeks used to be the source of food for the inland people, because that's where the salmon would run. And there are efforts to try to restore the run of the rivers, take down the dams, or provide fish ladders so that the salmon population will come back and be healthy. So in Kristiansand, there's a salmon research center and a display center, and this is the holy fish of the ancient times, because this fish would come back and provide so much food for the inland people. So it's just like Alaska that way. Then it was overfished, and then now they're trying to restore it. But the real problem is that they've gone to salmon fish farming, and that creates a greater amount of fish available, except that they have to go out and catch other fish or krill or shrimp, and they grind it up and feed these captive young salmon of different varieties. This is specifically North Atlantic Norwegian salmon. It's different from others around the world. But the problem that we met a fisherman the other day, he said the wild salmon are now getting kind of a virus or some sort of a sea tick from the fish farms, and that kills the wild fish, or the captive salmon break out and mingle with the wild fish and they become sterile, and so it's a problem. You have an industrial fishing farm next to wild salmon, and it often doesn't work. That's why in Alaska this is completely not allowed. All the salmon have to be wild. Well, people are hungry and they have to survive, which is the story of the world, but particularly in Norway, you had a very, let's say, elemental lifestyle. This is a recreation of one of the old earth ships, I'd call it earth houses, where they would dig down in the ground, pound down a floor in the mud, put up poles, and then they would frame out a roof, and then they would put sod over it. And these windows were there to let the smoke out from the fire. Then they would bring in many families. They often would sleep communally on a big elevated bedding, and then they would have the animals either outside or with them to keep warm in the winter, because this would be covered with many feet of snow. So that kind of rudimentary life depended on the agricultural season for growing food, when the salmon were coming back, when you could go hunting reindeer. And so it was sort of basic survival that is, again, part of the Norwegian character. And many had very poor health, very little education, no medical care. And so it's been the fate of Norwegian families for generations that they would go off to sea to work, or go be a Viking and pillage. Here's a romantic illustration of the departure of the young man to go away and maybe never come back, but he would be going out so he would get something for the community. So a lot of the music and the literature is about the family members leaving or never being able to come back. And then, again, many of them emigrated all around the world, but this nostalgia for the old countryside life is very strong and illustrated by paintings and ballads and different things that can still be heard. But this is a painting from the century or more ago about the wedding party going by boat to another village to entertain the newlyweds. But of course, the more famous expeditions of the Norse, including the Swedes and the Danes, were these great ships that they built. So this is a trading vessel, not a war vessel, but the size of these vessels has been found in archaeology to be having up to 100 rowers at a time. This open boat with a sail that could be put up, but it was mainly rowed out of the fjord, put up the sail, see where you go. They could be taken up the rivers. They were often portaged over land. And so they went all through Europe this way. And this kind of a longboat, or the Viking boat, is particularly effective in warfare, because they would come up on the great prow. They could sort of hide behind it and then attack from it. And with that ability and their determination, they went all over Europe and to the Americas and Newfoundland. But most of the Norse who went to Iceland, Greenland, America came from various ports in Norway. The Swedes went east onto the rivers down to Caspian Sea, Black Sea, down to Constantinople. Others, Rollo from Ålesund, went down to France and sacked Paris, and then came around all the way to Sicily and the Mediterranean. So this was an incredible story for about 820 to 1,000 years AD, where a determined band of these Norsemen who were terrorizing coastal Europe, actually many of them settled. So in Sicily you still get, you still see some Norwegian-style blonde-haired, blue-eyed people in Sicily as evidence of that time when they traveled. Well, there's a question, how did they go so far and know where they were going? Most of them were coastal piloting, so they would see the coast, continue on. If they needed supplies, they'd just go into the coast and restock, fill up with some booty or whatever they got and keep going to go find something else. So they were the ultimate explorers, but for navigation, they did not have a compass. They did know celestial navigation, though, so that they could tell from the sun and the apparent light, east, south, west, north, and they would have a what's called a horizon board, and they would have the stick with a little flag for the wind direction, but they could use the stick to sight the sun rising, so they would be able to know what latitude they were. So from Bergen, Norway, they could follow the latitude by the shadow of the sun, if there was sun, to go all the way to Iceland. And from each port in Norway, they could judge where they were going to land, either to Ireland, the Faroe Islands, etc. But the question for historians is, how did they find their way in the cold and the dark and the fog? Again, it's pretty bright and apparent right now, but much of the year the weather's bad, you can't see the sun, and you're looking for a speck of rock out there in the middle of the sea. This is the Faroe Islands, which are, again, part of Denmark today. And so some historians have found in archaeological burial boats what they call the sunstone, or the Icelandic spar, which is kind of a quartz crystal. And it has the quality of polarizing sunlight even in the dark, so that they're usually painted with a few points of ink on them. So when you point it out at the cloudy sky, when the polarization lines up those points, that means the sun is that way. So this is sort of a magical stone that was very much prized for navigation. Of course, it's now not used that way. I have one in my bag if the captain needs one, but he's Italian. He doesn't need any help. But they've had recreations of these boats as a kind of a educational experience in popular culture these days. So here's the University of Lund built a small craft to see how it would handle in the sea with traditional sail and steering board. They didn't have a real rudder. And so this is let's say, the recreation of the difficulties of this kind of voyaging in the past. And they came all the way down Norway, and they tried this all around Scandinavia, but you can see the expression on that young woman's face is, "Where's my butler?" But this particular crew came down from near Trondheim. They went up far to the north. They came down, then they did it in the Danish, Swedish waters and such. But the smaller the craft, the more likely it has problems. They didn't try to go to Iceland or across the ocean quite yet, but they did get swamped a couple of times. So that's the real education. And so they kept building more. I mean, this is sort of a ongoing recreation of traditional shipbuilding, which is quite different from the commercial shipping world, but often a big community event, and they keep building beautiful examples of the old handicrafts, and particularly as they found the the archaeology, the evidence in the ship burials, so they really know what they were like, including a lot of stone ballast and ropes and linen sails and things. And so this is sort of the revival of a great heroic tradition. And a few years ago, this one was built, the Ålesund, who is also known as Bluetooth, the Danish king, and his name goes on in your Wi-Fi connections. But this was a pretty big one, and it sailed quite remarkably well, and I couldn't download the video, but this craft, which is about 120 feet long, it's 60 some meters, the ship, because it's fairly light, it would almost jump off the waves and keep flying. So this is very fast. They didn't realize that the Viking era longboats could be so efficient at sea and survive. So this one sailed all the way across the Atlantic to Canada, came down to New York. I went to greet it at our local marina, so you can see the size of it. And of course, this was met with great pleasure by many a sailor to see the old style ship come back with its dragon head, and they let you go aboard, but there's no below. All the crew would sleep on the deck under maybe a bit of a tarp, so it's not quite as comfortable as some ships are. But this tradition goes on just because many Norwegians are still fishing, or they have their own personal boat. You can see it out in the harbor here right now. But you can imagine how tricky it was before there was more navigation. This picture I just took last evening, coming out and seeing all these islands, and before modern GPS and charts and all of that, you had to really know what was going on, where you were, and be brave enough to go out there and risk your life out at sea. So even just today in Trondheim, we went down to the harbor and saw the old fishing boats, and this is their statue. It says, Den siste Viking, the last of the Vikings. So it's the fishing men and women that have sort of carried on that can-do spirit in Norway. Well, you may have seen this item in the news not far south of here. There's a fjord where this commercial ship happened to run aground. It just happened because the mate was asleep, and he was supposed to turn. The computer didn't wake him up on time, or he didn't have an alarm, so it ended up right there at the front door of a local person. And in the news reports, supposedly the man that was in the house was asleep when he heard this crunch, and he rolled over and said, I don't know what that is, some tree creaking or something. And his neighbor said, Ole, by the way, you have a new ship has come, your ship has come in. And they came out, and then in the paper, the fellow said, well, I and the captain of that ship were having the same dream that someday we'd meet. Well, anyway, they pulled the ship off, and it's okay, and he didn't get hurt. So, but many have, let's say, not fared so well. So the coast of Norway is probably littered with more shipwrecks than anywhere else, and so this has led the government to try to make transportation safer, particularly in the far north, where there are all these different isles and bad weather and currents and cold. So what they've been building are what they call a ship tunnel, where in different places, this is this one right here, they design and then they cut a tunnel through a mountain low enough so a ship can get through in the water. So this is one of the remarkable engineering feats in Norway these days, is you can take a ship through a tunnel, through a mountain, and save quite a bit of time going all the way around the islands and coming back in. But more mundane problem is all of the other ships, particularly bigger cruise ships, that come into harbor and they keep their engines on, their generators like this ship. And so the Norwegian government has made a plan that will slowly eliminate what they call idling ships, and they'll have electrical input so a ship can come in and plug in, because that diesel fuel, particularly the bigger the ship, or it sits and it ruins the air in the fjord. So a lot of the residents complain when a ship comes in, I got to go take a hike because I'm choking on the fumes. So ships even of this size are supposed to be able to be run electrically, but that's you know, a challenge economically, of course. And then Norway also has leading ship design and marine engineering of automatic ships or alternative fuel, hydrogen, ammonia, some modern wind sail and stuff. So I went up to see a colleague up at the National Technical University, just up the hill from the cathedral. And we've been talking about doing some more test studies of my own design for a sort of a helix hydrofoil propeller, which we call a vortex propulsor, to be an alternative to the screw propeller. And we've been building this and testing this to see what the application is, at what size of a vessel. And currently we're also working on a kind of a double version turbine that'll be a propulsor for an autonomous submarine. So this is sort of the thing that Norway has been leading the world in designing and applying it to their commercial fleet and maybe some military. But meanwhile, it's a beautiful place. And you know, we're lucky to come here and when it's so nice and warm and sunny. And I once worked on a Swedish ship where we had a death. And I always remember my colleagues, they sang an old Norse song as an elegy to a sailor who had died at sea. And if my voice will be with me, I'm going to sing it to you. It says, "Vem kan segla utan vind, vem kan rå utan år, men vem kan lämna vänner sin utan fjällen tår? Who can sail without wind, and who can row without oars, and who can leave a dear friend without tears falling? Well, jag ska segla utan vind, and jag ska rå utan år, men vem kan lämna vänner sin utan fjällen tår? Well, I will sail without wind, and I will row without an oar, but how can I leave you, my dear friend, without tears falling? There you go. Anyway, I give that to you as a tribute to all the sailors that came from Norway and the ones just beginning. And I wish you a good trip tomorrow to Ålesund and then Kristiansand. My next talk will be in 3 days about Oslo. And so we'll have a visit to the great capital. We'll actually be there overnight, which is a great thing. So I wish you a bon voyage and happy sailing. Thank you. Thank you.